Hey, Misha, welcome to Just Like That.
Hi, Sahil. Thanks so much for having me here. It's an honor.
Fantastic. So, Misha, it's always really intrigued me a lot when two abstract things come together to form something very beautiful. Uh, since childhood, of course, we've studied economics in school, in college, and being in the HR space, behaviors come very naturally, right? You walk into a restaurant and you're looking all around to say, how are people behaving? But this new, so called new term that has become very popular over the last couple of years, which is a combination of the two of them, behavior and economics, called behavioral economics, right? So obviously, if you ask me what is behavioral economics, it's a combination of the two words. But
Right.
what does it really mean?
Perfect. So, to give you a brief background, I think traditionally, economists had the assumption that human beings behave rationally. That was always the idea, and that's really the basics of any neoclassical economic theory. And then we realized that no, actually, we're not always rational. There's sometimes where we'll take decisions based on our social factors or psychological factors, which weren't being accounted for when we just look at a pure scientific theory. So that's how I think the whole concept of behavioral economics came up. And then when I was in school, I took my regular economics classes. I was like, okay, I'm going to be this finance person, got thoroughly bored, and then sat in on a behavioral economics class, and my mind was blown because I was relating to the things that my professor was telling me. And I also happened to be in college when Dr. Thaler, one of the pioneers in behavioral economics, won the Nobel. So it was just that extra push that I needed to go down that field. So then after that, whether it was my thesis or my work right now, in the HR tech industry was very heavily influenced by behavioral economics. But what it is, it's
Fantastic.
just basically, you're absolutely right. It's the combination of how do our psychological factors affect our economic decisions.
So give us an example. Imagine I'm a fifth standard kid and I don't really understand all of this. Can you break it down for me?
Sure. Um, okay, let's take up the example of loss aversion. It's one of the most popular theories in behavioral economics, where human beings tend to focus more on the loss of something versus the gain on an investment that they would get. So, if as a child I was to give you three chocolates, and I would be like, okay, I'll flip a coin. And if it's a heads, then I'll give you two more. And if it's a tails, I'll take everything away. As a reflex, without any mathematical calculation on the probabilities and everything, you would say, you know what, let it be. I'm not going to take that risk because I'm so averse to loss. And then what becomes interesting is then basis on your upbringing or your financial situation or your gender, those choices get even more heavily influenced. So then when you're in a workplace where you have these multi generations, you have this diverse workforce, how do you then fix your policies to make sure each one is being met and you're getting the maximum productivity from any employee, when the very factors that we've grown with and the influences we've grown with are so different?
Very interesting. This has already got me so intrigued because you're actually picking up value system, you're picking up upbringing, you're picking up principles of economics, and more importantly, how people really behave in the work environment. Wow.
Right.
But Misha, tell me about this, right? Obviously, our forefathers and two, three generations earlier would have what would be called the 9 to 5 job. Job security was very important. Canteen facility was so important because they got good food to eat at the factory or the office. And
Absolutely.
today's generation, which is you and me as millennials, want everything OTT, right? We're talking about where is the whole Netflix of learning, where is the Uberization of engagement? I want hyper personalized rewards. Don't give me the standard rewards that you give everyone else because my need is very different from a senior advisor who may be in his 60s or 70s on the board,
Absolutely.
right? So, how does the whole concept of behavioral economics play out as principles in the hyper personalized world of engagement as well as rewards, performance management, so on and so forth?
Definitely. So Sahil, I'm so glad you brought it up, especially when we look at workforces today that still have our parents' generation and then still have us in the same company and sometimes in the same team. So how do you really make sure everyone's being rewarded in an appropriate way? I think it kind of goes back to, you hear a lot of HR leaders speak about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where as a basic, there are some hygiene factors that need to be met. You're getting your financial compensation, you're getting the benefits associated with the job, which I think in the olden times, sometimes that was fine, that was enough. As millennials, you want that extra step. You want step 3 and step 4 of, am I in an environment where I'm being able to innovate? Am I in an environment where I'm being able to bond with my colleagues? So recently, in fact, we've been working on a white paper that focuses on 4 drives that are particularly focused on millennials. So it's this excellent Harvard professor, his name is Nitin Noria, where he said there are 4 drives that push a human being to achieve their maximum potential: the drive to acquire, the drive to innovate, the drive to defend, and the drive to bond. But the way these 4 drives are instilled across generations is very different. So when you speak very rightly about hyper personalization, just to give you an example, I was that day, I had a company tell me, we were thinking of giving pressure cookers to people who've completed their first year as an award. And I was like, you know what, can you give me those Swiggy vouchers instead? Because I'm not going to go home and cook. Which, I mean, just to give you an example, so I think the first step to anything is you need to be listening to what your employees actually want. And before you can even choose to personalize anything for them, and then honestly empower them to make the choice. So if my colleague wants a pressure cooker but I want Swiggy vouchers, let me go to whatever points based software you have and pick what I want, right? Even if you may not always have the knowledge to know that. And of course, most importantly, I think we've discussed this before as well, the focus on employee listening is really important, because the majority of your Indian workforce today looks like you and me, but the decision makers don't. So how do they connect with us, and how do they listen to what we want? It's really amusing, Sahil, that I've had 2-3 meetings in the past where I'll have people talking to me and they're like, we only wanted to talk to you because our employees look like you. So we want to know, what do you want? So we'll go give it to them. And I think it's very sweet, gesture, but I'm like, why are you talking to me? Go talk to them. Like, conduct yourself.
Yeah, it's so easy, right? It's so easy.
Exactly. Especially in today's digital world, you conduct your surveys, have listening conversations one-on-one, have them connect with your executive management, have collaboration forums. They're little steps, but they will make sure your engagement journey and your employee life cycle is personalized to what a person needs.
Yeah. But Misha, that really brings me to think that why is it so difficult? And I know some companies do this very well, which are the new young age ones, but the traditional ones find it so difficult to get young talent on their leadership teams as special invitees, right? I'm not saying get them permanently, but when you need to design a policy or a workforce or a plan, get involvement of people from all strata in the workforce so that you get good representation and the voices are heard. Because ultimately, as you said, if the decision makers are the ones who are not going to be the ones for the beneficiaries or a limited section of the beneficiaries, you're not going to really sail the boat, right?
Absolutely.
So
I think,
interesting.
When you ask why it's so hard, Sahil, I think often decision makers or executives want to see of how it's impacting your financial statements. And I don't think that's a wrong question to ask. As a business owner, you want to know, how will engaging my employees affect my bottom line? Does it make a difference? Then I'll put in the investment and do it. And, fact of the matter is, I was reading the recent Gallup study that came out, and they said that companies that are incorporating behavioral economic principles when creating their policies are seeing an 85% jump in revenue and like 25% jump in profits. So the studies have started. And I think we need to go and tell our leaders, hey, you need to be doing this to do well in the industry. So I think it's not enough to just go say, it's a nice to have thing. It's to be, employees will be happy. No, how is that happiness going to affect their productivity? And how will it affect the bottom line? Because that is what...
That correlation becomes very important, Misha, because the moment you draw that correlation, you're making it a lot more tangible, aren't we?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to the last piece. So of course, you really spoke about the whole concept of tangibilization. You also very beautifully touched upon how data through reports is really backing up the business case for getting behavioral economics in center stage. But tell me, is it an art? Is it a science? Is it a combination of the two? What is it?
So that's a really good question. I would say it is a combination. I think most things in life are and should be. But I think employee engagement and behavioral economics in the workplace specifically is, because you need to be, of course, sensitive to an employee's emotional and mental well-being and emotional needs, which some people say come under art. The art of communicating effectively with your employees. But at the same time, you need to have the data to show you that your programs of rewards, of engagement are working. And that's always been our focus as well, that how do we have regular reporting to you to see the ROI of your program? You ask me, I'm a combination of the two. My father he breathes data as a living, and my mother's a drama teacher. So I'm a combination of the two. So everything I do in life has to be a combination of the two, including Gratify, including academia. But that's no better way to do it, because you need to have both your left and right brains working to have you reach the best potential that you can, and that's same for any firm.
Yeah, no, very well said. But I'm just thinking that enough is never enough, right? Because in this whole space of engagement, rewards, jitna bhi karo utna kam hai. So where does the art, the science, and the data find the congruence?
No, absolutely. I think there's no end to hyper personalizing your rewards, to appreciating. Should it happen daily? Should it happen weekly? Should we just have an annual function? Honestly, my answer to that is let your employees decide. You start your program and you do your best to make sure the adoption is happening. See how well they take it, and they will inform your decisions going forward.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying keep your ears out there, because at the end of the day, if you do it daily or very frequently, you're going to have the economic principle of diminishing marginal utility hitting you, right? If you don't do it in the manner in which they want it, or you spend too much money, they're going to say, listen, you're spending so much on a stand-up comedian, might as well give that same money to us as bonus.
No, absolutely. And Sahil, that's not just for employees, it's for your customers, it's for your channel partners. We had this brand come up to us and they were giving out prizes to their rural workforce, and they wanted to give them Bluetooth headphones. And we had a salesperson come up and say, can you give us mini fridges instead? Because that's what we need. That's what's more value to us. And it really hit a chord, because we didn't even think that. We were like, oh, we'll get these JBL headphones and we brand it. And so I think with everyone, if you keep your ears open, half your job is done. Then you just need the systems to help you. But the first act is just keeping your ears open and hearing what people want.
Fantastic, Misha. It was very beautiful hearing what you had to say. And thank you so much for joining us on Just Like That.
Of course. Thanks, Sahil. Thanks for having me.